Hey guys. So, a podcast, of course, always starts with a goal and your why. So, when I happen to meet Christina Barsi, otherwise known as Barsi, with Avant House Media, she does production for purpose driven women for podcasts. And I don't even remember. I think I saw some content on LinkedIn or something, and I was like, "Ooh, that's juicy." And we started chatting on LinkedIn. So yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I actually saw your content and I commented on
Oh
something
yeah.
and then I made content, I guess. And you were like, hey,
I
we should
know.
talk. And I was like, yes, I agree.
Yes. And we had a great chat. I know. LinkedIn, I love the connections that you can make on LinkedIn.
Agreed. I'm really am sort of diving in after not enjoying social media very much and sort of finding new
Yeah,
energy for it there.
I know. Yeah, LinkedIn is so much better. And what I loved about your content, your purpose is your purpose. I love that you are like talking about like heart-led goals and like aligning your business and your brand goals with your podcast. And like, it's funny because like everyone thinks, oh, a podcast, my purpose is to grow an audience and grow business. But there's
Yeah.
more to that, right? Like, so what is your definition of purpose and like purpose driven people?
Great question. I'm hearing you form the question and I'm like, I was asking myself like why is that important to me? And maybe that's where it all boils down to is I'm always asking why. And if we don't know that,
Hmm.
it's such a guiding compass whenever we can listen to someone else speak, and it gives us more empathy and compassion when we are asking why of someone else. And that's a really self-kind thing to do for ourselves as well. So when we're creating anything, I think asking ourselves why is not only curiosity inducing, but it's also connected to something bigger than an outcome. Whys are not your
Hmm.
outcome. They're the driver. It's the maybe the rudder of the boat, if you will, or the thing that's propelling you to go, the thing that is almost, some people might describe as a download. It depends what communities you hang out in. But this sort of information of inspiration that comes and
Right.
forms from all of the things that excite you or that you've been paying attention to, or and then it kind of like coagulates and forms into this sort of moment of like, ooh, is this worth putting some action around?
Mm.
And and that's kind of how I feel like the idea turns into something that we can then consider pursuing, at least like a podcast, like a
Hmm.
business, which is even a bigger version of that. um I bring up business now because many podcasts are formed to sort of create more companionship and expansion around something else like a business or
Hmm.
personal brand or things like that. So the purpose, though, to go even deeper, in my opinion, my definition is it's very connected to our intuition and why we think we do anything we do in this
Yeah.
world, and what that really propels us into in terms of, again, action. So it's what I call inspired action. That's the
Ooh, I like that.
first part I kind of went over. And it's that thing that comes from our heart. So that's the heartfelt part. And if we tap into that, if we pay attention to that, which we're often taught not to, then we get clearer answers and our action steps are clearer and our audience
Mm.
knows how to show up because we're being clear. And it all just
Right.
trickles out in a way that is much simpler, even though it seems that first step as a slower process.
Yeah.
It's actually a faster one because you're making more aligned steps if we're
Mm.
following that.
I love that because, and what kind of spoke to me was the whole thing about why being like the end result. And that's kind of like how my brain always goes because it's so like it can be very linear. It's like, oh, I'm having a podcast because I want to do this and I want leads and I want to grow the business or whatever. But the way you look at it is like beyond kind of the basics, if you will. And I like that whole inspired action. So are you saying then that like, your why is like beyond business, if you will. Like your why is more personal.
I think why is part of the it's part of both sides of the thing. If we were going to like draw some circles on a board,
Mhm.
the why would kind of sit in that like crossover bubble,
Oh yeah.
kind of as the communicator between your purpose and your action, right? So you're having to kind of be in all three bubbles at the same time in a sense,
Yeah.
where you're wanting to check in with your purpose to see if the whys are meaningful to you, right? Like asking the question of your purpose, why this, why that, whatever it is. Um, and continuing to ask why, continuing to be curious forever, honestly, but whatever we're creating, doing, etc. But that why is kind of fluctuating between the action. Is the action serving the purpose? Is the purpose going
Right.
to serve the action? And the why is kind of always there to facilitate that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I'm seeing
Okay.
it there. It's this constant conversation that we're having with ourselves and then having with our experience. So internal reflects the external. And I think we're
Right.
often taught it's the other way. And
Hmm.
that's not true. It does go both ways in the sense that you're influenced by your outside world. But
Yeah.
I think you can modify that and you can shift it more into coming from your heart than coming from the outside data and the things that people say need to happen. So then you take your direction externally versus taking your direction from your internal
Right.
compass, let's say. So the why is kind of like facilitating the conversation in all of those areas. Um, I hope that I know I went into a
Yeah.
big conceptual version of that, but
No, that makes sense. So I'm just trying to like paint a picture. So when you're working with your clients and you're like producing a podcast, launching it, whatever, and you have someone's like, oh, I want to launch this podcast. Obviously, that's the first question you're going to ask. How does that usually play out? And how does the answer impact the podcast itself?
yeah, wonderful. So if I'm doing an intro call, right? An intro call, someone calls me, they ask me this question, they have an idea. Um, I'm gauging whether they're connected to that part of themselves or not. So I'm listening for that.
Mm,
I'm listening to see if, um, okay, tell me why you're inspired to create this show. Tell me what anything that you think it is so far. Like some people have a lot of ideas. Some people are starting with just a little bit of an inspiration. We don't know. So trying to figure out how far along they are with that as well to see if they're ready to actually work with someone. But through that process, I'm also trying to see if they're hoping for uh, just the outcomes, but there's nothing
mm,
to drive those outcomes. That's where there's a big hole. If we don't understand, if we don't, we, and I say we, but I mean like the host or the creator, the person who's on the call with me, if they
yeah,
don't really understand why they need to do this or why it's a podcast, not a YouTube channel, or
right.
why they're not focusing this energy in their another part of their business, let's say, because those goals maybe aren't
Mm,
goals that will yield them those outcomes through a podcast. So I'm trying to get the most, um, and we can do this in just a few questions,
yeah,
really. People can give me that information and I'll,
yeah,
I'll pretty much know whether they're, which way they're looking at it. If they're looking at it from a perspective of, it's a long-term thing that's really going to serve their soul in a way or
yeah,
serve their business or create expansion or it can be very practical too, where they just have all the clarity about, they've done the work and they're like, this is the mission of my business. I love it. It works. And I
yeah.
just want to get more of this out. That works too. Then we kind of approach it a little differently. In terms of how to move forward. I personally, as an agency, really enjoy working with ground level clients that want to kind of build something that's going to add to their personal growth as well.
Mm, I love that. You do learn a lot about yourself as you podcast,
Yes.
right?
Yes. It's like a self-developmental course once you
I
start.
know. And it's like, confidence building and communication and putting yourself out there, learning new things. Yeah, so so many elements.
Yeah.
So when you talk to a client and you're, starting the podcast out, obviously, you're talking about the why and the purpose. What kind of goals do you set? Where do goals come in?
I think goals come in right away. Again, it's one of the questions I ask if we're on a call, to see if they have any, to see if
Hmm.
they've thought of that, to see if this is just not that style of show, or maybe it really is a hobby podcast and their
Right.
goal is to have a hobby, and that's a goal.
Yeah.
That's something they're trying to add into their life. That's a source of fulfillment. So that's a different kind of goal than someone who does, let's say, again, using business as an example, who has, let's say it's a solo business where they don't have employees. It's just a solo business and it's just them, and they want to have more engagement with maybe a new demographic that they know they
Mm,
can serve, or they're pivoting like so many of us are right now, or rebranding, or finding new
yeah.
ways to serve. um, and you may realize there's different people who can be served by you, or all of these discoveries can be made in
Yeah.
business. And then you can take those discoveries and build an expansion program around it with a podcast. So these are different ways to kind of approach goals. And then those goals can be reflected in the creative concept of how we
Right.
deliver and formulate this show so they can really shine from that part of themselves that maybe they haven't before. This is
Yeah.
why I like to work with this kind of client, because it is kind of like a opportunity to show themselves something empowering about themselves that they want to lean into, but need the support
Yeah.
and build structure around that. So that's one way you can look at goals. And then in the practical sense, one thing I noticed, and I speak on this a lot lately, when I talk about success and goals, is misplaced success because we have misplaced goals.
Ooh.
Meaning we think that we aren't successful, let's say, but because we're putting uh, the wrong goals at the wrong timeline of our journey. And we're like, oh, these goals is what everyone says, going back to your outcome question, what I
Mm,
think I'm supposed to be achieving right now. And it's like,
right.
that's actually not what you're going to be focusing on for the next maybe 6 months from now, maybe two, three
Right.
years from now, which the common ones are, really associating downloads with success and really associating monetization with success
Yeah.
in the linear sense. Like brands need to work with me because that's how I heard that podcasts make money. And it's very, of course, and that's not true. It's just not the most common way that most podcasts are building their success.
Yes.
That's how Joe Rogan is building his success. And he's very famous, and we know that. And so that is what's reflected to us as how it works,
Yeah.
as just a blanket statement, right? So I talk a lot about, really tapping into what stage in the cycle you're in, and then building goals that are particular to the person, behind the mic, the person that showed up to make something. What are
Yeah.
their actual goals, and what's going to bring them a sense of fulfillment? Because success without fulfillment doesn't feel like anything. It's very fleeting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, my job to build in this sort of fulfillment experience for you so that you don't quit, so that you do keep going, so you
Yes.
realize that what you're doing, even though it's hard and new, is worth keeping going,
Yeah.
so that you can continue to build more small goals and more small goals. And we just package it. I do a 10-week set. So we do 10 weeks, if assuming you're doing one once a week release, let's say,
Yeah.
and we create some goals for those 10 weeks and out the gate, outside of these big goals we talked about a moment ago. And we go, okay, so what makes sense to look at right now? Just 2 to 3 of them. And we kind of assess at a certain point, and we don't overlook at our analytics. I'm very trickly about those. Where I'm like, I will
Yeah.
give you a report and I'll break it down for you in 3 weeks. We're not going to look at them every day. We're not going to
God,
obsess
no.
over them.
Baby
And it's
steps.
like, yeah. And it's like, okay, these titles aren't working for us. How can we tweak that? And sometimes it's so
Mm,
simple.
yeah.
Um, so many ways to then like have us all come together and look at
Yeah.
what people are really loving, what we aren't hitting, what kind of goal we want next, and all of that. So it just continues on and on, like with that
Yeah.
process.
And how you're feeling about it. It's like you may go
Yes.
into podcasting with one idea of how it's going to feel and what it's going to be like. And then all of a
Yeah,
sudden you're like, oh. And I like what you said
totally.
about fulfillment. It's like some people, oh, I need to create a podcast because everyone else is doing it or my coach told me to
Yes.
or whatever. But if you don't have that sense of purpose and you're not going to have a sense of fulfillment throughout the process, it's just going to fall flat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had clients in my early starting where we just were like, let's just do stuff. Let's just do
Yeah.
stuff with everyone. And occasionally that did occur, which is where I learned a lot in how to set goals for, how to work with people to set goals and create
Right.
a fulfillment pathway. I say success pathway because we use that word a lot, but in reality, it's a fulfillment pathway,
Right.
and really tapping into what that means for them and not what necessarily what that means for someone else. And we've definitely had people that fizzled out a little sooner that were actually technically doing better than the ones that stayed in the game if you compared them side by
Oh,
side.
interesting.
But they wouldn't allow themselves to buy into it. They didn't feel it. They didn't
Mm,
believe it. So it's important. It can really, as simple as it sounds, without the confidence, you quit.
yeah. Yeah.
And you need that to be
Yeah.
based in some kind of reality. So if you're not believing the reality around you about how it's going,
Yeah.
you have a skewed version of that because we're over comparing or we're feeling impostery and the
Totally.
comparison is a catalyst for imposter syndrome. Then we don't have a clear sense of what's really going on and we may fade out.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Are you not getting that positive feedback? Is there a wrong way to make a goal? Like, have you had clients where like, this is my goal, and you're like, let's rethink that.
For sure. And it comes back to this early part of my answer where I was saying, oftentimes we just misplace our goals.
Mm,
They're in the wrong part of the timeline
right.
where we are, and for so many reasons, right? Like, and I just want to qualify this by saying that I'm also a certified coach. So when I say this, it's
Ooh.
something that I've practiced, but
Yeah.
perfectionism can come in. I suffer from that. So I know that one well, where, it's like, oh, it's going to be like, I have to do all of these things. And if I don't, then I don't know, I'm not good enough,
Yeah.
whatever we tell ourselves. And in actuality, I'm the only one holding myself to that. And no one else is doing like it's not
I
going to
know.
propel me to more success. It's just something I made up in my
Yeah.
head that I think is important.
Been there.
Um, so that we all have things like that. And there's versions of that for all of us in different categories. So it's really about like coming back to earth and like getting out of our heads sometimes and realizing like, okay, what's realistic here? Where
Yeah.
do these goals actually belong? Am I going to be satisfied with that? And that's a good thing to understand. Is like maybe it's not, maybe you tried it, podcasting, that is,
Yeah.
and you don't love it, and it's not bringing you the
Totally.
fulfillment you hoped it would, and that's okay too. Then it's like, all
Agreed.
right, well, you still have these goals and you still want to do these things. How can we do that in another way? Um,
I love
so yeah,
that.
misplaced goals, I think
Yeah.
are things that are conversations that we have that is great to have someone who's like myself, who's seen, lots of different styles of
Yeah.
podcasts and what those early stages look like and what those later stages look like too, like 4 years in, what the expectation is then. And,
Yeah.
when we plateau and why, and where the dip seasons are during the year, even like, it's just so nice to have that sort of barometer from someone that
Yes. And
that
have the
has,
chance to like
yeah.
give yourself grace if like something is not perfect the one time or whatever it may be.
Yeah, yeah. Making mistakes is the best way to succeed. Like to
Phew.
yeah. Like I always celebrate when someone does something really like they're like, oh my God, like this all fell apart. That might do like all of these
Yeah.
things. And I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
You're
because
hilarious. I'd be like, what?
because now it's over. You did that.
Yeah.
And it's in the
The
past and it's
worst. Yeah.
probably not going to happen again. And you can, you did that, and that's like
Yeah.
a badge on your journey. And the goal there is to just keep going and to know that it's part of it. It's just
I
part of the
know.
process.
So true. And and I've had this like experience myself where it's like, okay, I have a certain goal, a thing that I want to do, accomplish. And then, your business changes. I've niched down numerous times. I've morphed and changed my business slightly to fit where I'm at in life. And it's like, I have a hard time letting go. If I am trying to like, I need to like just let that go and move on to something else, but I feel like I'm quitting, or like, how do you process changing your goals as your life changes?
Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. I'm in the middle of this right now. And it's just, it's real. It is going to be
Hmm.
hard. It's going
I
to be
know.
painful. It's going to be a grieving moment if you allow yourself to get to that point. You're going to have to let go. You're going to have to do all of those things you just shared. If you are if you're listening to yourself,
Yeah.
which it sounds like when you get to that point, you are. So that is a good thing, but it is not necessarily super simple and easy. And maybe for some people, they're more exercised at it. The more I let go and have these
Yeah.
moments, and you said you've done it a few times. So I should ask you, does it get a touch easy? Like you've seen it before and you've done it
Yes.
before.
Like I like left my podcast because I just was burnt out, needed a break, but I felt guilty for like leaving it. And then I came
Yeah.
back in a different way, and I was going after a different part, like a different niche, like a side business kind of a thing. And I was like doing it and it was fun. But then I was like, ooh, all the prospects I'm getting are not they're not my ideal client. And I was kind of like I kind of want out. And then I was like, oh, but I feel like I'm quitting. And am I not giving it enough try? And then as soon as I
Mhm.
did, I was like, whoo, now I get to reinvent myself.
That's amazing because it sounds like you trusted yourself regardless, even though it felt like, oh, I don't know. And then you were like, oh, this was definitely the right
Yeah.
thing. And I think that's what it is. It's just trying to again continue having the conversation with ourselves and knowing that the evolution and the growth is a good thing.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's the resistance that is the pain typically.
Yeah,
So when we
true.
resist letting go and we resist the change, when we resist ourselves and what we are, I mean, why are we telling ourselves we need to move on? There's something there. There's
Yeah.
something there to listen to, even if it's, again, just asking that question, why? Like, why am I feeling
Right.
this way? And sometimes it's not about quitting. Sometimes it's about just changing it a little
Yep.
bit and niching down, as you said.
Yeah.
And I've done a little bit of both at the same time in different areas currently. And it is tricky and it is hard. But as long as we stay connected to our purpose, once again, like the thing
Yeah.
that is the driving force of why we do anything we really do, and then asking, like, is this serving me? Like, is this thing that I'm doing still serving me, not anyone else? You have to ask yourself first.
Yeah.
And then in turn, if excuse me, if you decide to stay, let's say, okay, it is serving me, but if I change these areas of it,
Yes.
and then it's like, can I still serve the people? The people, do I need to serve different people? And that's where the pivots start coming in and
Right.
the changes. And that's a process like everything else for sure. But your podcast can reflect all of those changes too. I've changed the way I show up on my show a few times as well. And I'm always questioning it too, even though I know all of these things. You know all of
Yeah.
these things too. I know you do. And it's just a matter of when you're in it,
Yeah.
the cloudiness comes from the emotions and the process of getting through the hard time. And that can be reflected in our money. And that's very hard. And, how our income and our relationships sometimes. And so the big things in life, whenever we change, get affected by it.
Yeah.
So of course it's going to be hard, but
I know.
but
You
it's
second
worth
guess
it.
yourself. And it's like
Yeah,
you have a different idea. I think even the idea of what you think is success changes over time.
I agree.
So I imagine that changes your goals and then your perspective and all that good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. And so quickly, my show is called Be Bold Begin. We originally just talked about creative tools to get out of your own way to get started in fill in the blank, whatever it is you're
Yeah.
working on or want to work on, or all of that good stuff. So it's very was very fun. I was very energized for me to do it that way for a while. And lately, I really bring on humans that want to talk about the big transformation in their life, kind of what we're talking about right
Mm,
now, where it's like, yeah, I was doing all of these, I was living my life this way. These
yeah.
were, and then I met my goals, I was doing it. And the fulfillment part we talked about
Ooh, right.
wasn't really hitting for them. And oftentimes, a lot of them shared their stories of sickness and how that was affecting their health. And then there's this big moment where something changed and they leaned into, whatever was on the other side of that, and realized that their idea of success is 100% not what they were pursuing before.
Yeah.
And that I've heard that a lot. And then I've also heard stories where they're like, I thought it was my job. It wasn't my job that was the problem. It was the way they were kind of approaching their life. And they weren't, they could have stayed at the job. They did quit and they went on this other journey.
Yeah.
But particularly this woman was a lawyer, very high performing and all of this stuff. But there's a world where you don't necessarily have to quit. It's typically an inner job, all of our change that we're seeking.
Yeah.
Sometimes that does require an experience change, like how we're experiencing our day and where we go each day and all of that for sure, but not always. So those are things I learned from my guests. And I just wanted to share that because it's on
Yeah.
the topic of what we're talking about. And my show naturally shifted because I
Hmm.
was just so interested in what these guests had to say. I wasn't booking, they were finding me and I just
Interesting. So
leaned
you
into it.
attracted it. Yeah.
Yes. And it just continued. It's been like that for like 2.5 years now.
Amazing.
And I
I mean,
haven't sourced my own guests in a really long time.
that's wicked. Good for
Yeah.
you.
Truly wicked.
Um, yeah, and hearing people's transformation stories, it's just like, okay, so that crap that I'm feeling and going through whatever, like I can get through the other side. I can figure it out. And how did they deal with it? And I'm sure that's very rewarding to impact that many people and help that many people and hear all those stories.
It's so inspiring for me personally. Even if I didn't share it with the world, I
Yeah.
just enjoy being in the space with these people so much. And I learned so much from them and they're doing amazing things. And I just feel so grateful that they continue to find me.
Yes. Good for you. So when
Yeah.
you're like how what do you call a heart-based business? I know that term is out there and you had a similar verbiage, but I just can't remember what it is right now. And
Yeah.
purpose-driven like women businesses. Like we all have a purpose in some way. Like what is your version of that?
Yeah, exactly. We do. And uh part of the reason I'm experimenting with those words on the screen, like meaning outward facing,
Mm.
is based on who I appreciate being in space with
Mm.
and testing out if the magnetism works with
Yeah.
the language, kind of like what I shared about my podcast just now, and allowing my business to, I'm sort of testing that in my
Yeah.
business to see if the traction can expand into other parts of my outward facing life
Love
in
that.
addition to the podcast. So that's my witchy marketing.
But your messaging matters, right? Like
It
it's
does.
you have to same with like when you create a podcast, your title, your description, like you have to attract the audience or the clients. Like
Yeah.
who are you attracting?
Yes. And so it's not, I mean, I call it witchy marketing for fun, but the truth is that if I'm speaking from a place that feels really good to me, that's my heartfelt purpose, is to
Yeah.
bring in others that are willing to have a conversation like this, like you and I are having, where we don't necessarily skirt around this part of the conversation or
Yeah.
know that we are operating from a place that's bigger than us, whether that's, people have their own version of what that means to them. But that part to me is not super important. It's more just about how they're navigating, if they're navigating from that sort of internal versus external.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm looking for. So when I say heartfelt, that's what I mean for the most part. like some of my clients work in, government state stuff. So you wouldn't necessarily think that
No.
that's what I would get, and with that kind of, but there's some of my favorite clients because we are in this intimate process together
Yeah.
and we can talk very frankly from a place of heart. And this client I'm thinking of right now is going through these big realizations and wanting to add more
Mm.
purposeful language and branding within their department
Oh,
because it's
interesting.
so fake. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And I can't take credit for that, but I do think that having safe spaces
Yeah.
like we do in conversation help facilitate those thoughts
Yes.
and make it safe for people to come into their heart when they approach
Yeah.
business. And so that is kind of what I mean when I
I
say
love
that.
that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so good. And it's like we're all people, we're all human. We all are driven by emotions, like you said, purpose, goals. And so when you're creating a podcast, like you can't take the human out of that. And you're speaking to other people besides who you're interviewing, but like your audience, you want to connect. It's not just about words, sounds and words in an airway. It's like you have to take that into consideration when you are creating content, be it a podcast or otherwise.
Hmm. Yes. And I think we're as humans in a constant exercise with ourselves, with our authenticity.
Yeah.
And the more I'm on the mic, the more I fine tune that part of myself. And uh, probably subconsciously for the most part, but because I have conversations like this, it's probably more forefront for me.
Yeah. It's
But
easier.
yeah, it's interesting. I went on a colleague's show recently and we talked a lot about that sort of imposter syndrome that comes up with how we think we are supposed to show up.
Yeah.
And as soon as we let that go, I've literally seen downloads increase
Ooh.
in some, which is a fun way to go, okay, it's working.
Yeah.
Even though it feels uncomfortable at first, it's it's a thing you can practice. You can practice how to be more yourself. And that's a fun thing to keep trying to get to. And so, and talking about goals, one of my biggest goals is to just be more and more me and
Yeah.
make it safe for me to be more me so that I can make it safe for others to be more them. So safe spaces is a big core value for
Yeah.
me, but I can't offer that if I'm not doing that for myself. And
Ain't
it's,
that true?
yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
to do, but it does actually impact your interest to your audience. If we're bringing back to like a pragmatic outcome,
Yeah.
it does help. It's why we like reality TV, other than the drama, but the ones that aren't necessarily,
Yeah.
we're not even leaning into that as much anymore from a television perspective and from a production perspective. It's really just, we like seeing people
Yeah.
meet their goals. I love
And go
competition shows.
through crap and how do they get through it and you're like,
Yeah.
you're invested in their love
Yeah.
life or whatever the heck it may be.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, we want to relate. We want to see
Yeah.
ourselves mirrored back and we want to see how other people do it. And it's less about being a perfect, 1950s pinup picture.
Mhm.
We're definitely far away from that now for the most part. There's still
Yeah.
residuals of that world, of perfectionism, but it's, yeah, it's interesting.
I know.
But
It is easier. And I find like over the past, I remember being petrified doing, podcasts and guesting and hosting. And you feel like you have to, have this polished studio and be like perfect and gorgeous and polished. And I'm like, if I slip on words, it's fine. Like it shows that I'm human. If I'm allowed to make a joke, I am
yeah,
leaning more into like being a little bit more vulnerable and it is hard for people to do that sometimes, but I'm attracted to like, you know, how and what you say is like I'm connected to that. And when I
mhm,
see other people that are authentic, normal human beings that have emotions and are okay to express it, you connect with that.
yeah. I agree. I'm attracted to it too. And to be fair, like on the other side of it, I've definitely gotten pushback in certain arenas
Oh, really?
from that. Yeah, just being, I don't know if that's being a woman or if that
Mm.
adds, I think it definitely adds to my experience at times
Yeah.
of, I laugh a lot. I can be bubbly at times. I can diffuse the energy if it's too, uptight or,
Mhm.
not everyone appreciates that experience.
Yeah.
um, and, whatever though, it's not, you can't change your personality
No.
for, and, I say that to say that, there are some rooms where you still have to gauge whether you feel safe or not.
Yeah.
Because that is a thing. Safety is a thing, like
Mhm.
actual safety. But I think it's podcasting specifically is a nice space
Mhm.
where we can exercise that.
Yeah. And I feel like by being your normal, regular, authentic self, it's easier to kind of be aligned with your purpose and your goals because you're not out in left field trying to be something you're not.
Totally. And I get shiny object distracted sometimes from
Who
my
doesn't?
purpose where I'm like, ooh, that looks cool. I haven't done that yet. And it's like you go off in this other direction
Yeah.
and then you're like, whoa, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we
I
need
know.
people in our lives to go, hey, are
What
you
are you
enjoying
doing?
this? Are you happy? Is this what you want? And it's like, oh
I
my God,
know.
no, it's not what I want.
No. And you'll never see me on TikTok.
Noted.
It's not me.
I
Um,
tried. I tried. There's like 3 videos that
yeah,
people can
it
find and
just I can't bring myself. Podcasting, I love because I think too, like I love the connecting with another person and like live Facebook, I couldn't get into. I just
yeah.
felt super uncomfortable where I feel so much more comfortable when there's like another person and there's like human interaction and back and forth. And
I love that too. And that's my sweet spot as well. I even like that at a party. I'm the person in the corner that's like, tell me everything about your life. And
yes, me
I'll be
too.
with that person for like an hour, hours. Yeah, that's my it's like not the best at a networking scenario, but I make really lovely deep
There you go. And make great
relationships.
friends.
Yeah.
We need to be at a party together.
Oh, we would just be in the corner.
I know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, what a fun conversation. And I hope it for those that are in a podcast or looking to pivot or starting one, it's like really think about your purpose, your why, your goals, and listening to your intuition and your feelings. And so I really appreciate the conversation. I think it's one that not a lot of people have.
Thank you for that. I agree. And I appreciate you facilitating it in the way that we could have a more full rounded sort of
Yeah.
holistic talk around what it really looks like.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. How can people find you so they can yeah, have you coach them start a podcast and start that conversation with you?
Thank you. So my complicated company name is Avant House Media. And that has a lovely area where you can just, see if we're a good fit. And there's some
Mhm.
questions there because I'm so purpose driven, as you now know, that I ask you a lot of things up front so that you can start thinking about what these answers are for yourself. And it's already clarifying whether I ever see them or not. So
Yeah.
there's a few questions there for us to connect. That's one way to go about it. And of course, I'm on Instagram at the Barsi. Those are the main ways right now. LinkedIn,
Perfect.
LinkedIn, of course, too.
Yes, that's how we connected. And I remember you have a fear and imposter exercise. And I thought, ooh, I think everyone
Yes.
should take that. What is the link for that? And I'll obviously put it in the show notes.
Yes, that is fearimposter.avanthousemedia.com. And it should take you may have to just qualify or sign up, and then it'll send you the download
Yeah.
right away.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Barcy, and I'm so glad to have had the chance to connect and learn from you.
Thank you, Lindsay. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Bye, folks. We'll see you next week.